All right, welcome to class, everyone. Go ahead and find your seats. Today, we're diving into an epic masterclass on the most powerful office in the world. Our goal for this explainer, we are going to condense over 240 years of presidential history, from fake teeth to fake news, covering the 45 men who essentially built the United States into a single rapid-fire session. So get your notebooks ready, because we're going to cover a lot of ground, and I promise you, it's a wild ride. So here is our syllabus for the day. Unit 1 is Building the Nation. Then Unit 2, Expansion and Rising Tensions. Unit 3 covers the Civil War and Reconstruction. After that, Unit 4, Becoming a Global Superpower. And finally, Unit 5, The Modern Presidency. Let's dive right in. Kicking things off with Unit 1, Building the Nation. It's honestly wild to think about, but so much of what we consider totally normal today was just George Washington figuring things out on the fly. As a somewhat reluctant general inventing the executive branch from scratch, he set some absolutely crucial precedents, creating the cabinet, establishing the two-term limit, and ensuring a peaceful transfer of power. The guy was so popular he won the Electoral College unanimously twice. But, the honeymoon phase didn't last long. When John Adams took over, France was furious with America. So to prevent a full-on war, Adams signed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which literally made it illegal to trash-talk the government. As you can guess, the public absolutely hated it, and it completely torpedoed his popularity. That massive misstep opened the door for Thomas Jefferson, which brings us to this frankly staggering number, $15 million. Jefferson pulled off the Louisiana Purchase, effectively doubling the size of the entire country for just 4 cents an acre. I mean, the man was brilliant, founding the University of Virginia and designing his famous estate, Monticello, but we have to recognize he leaves behind a deeply complicated legacy, because Monticello is the exact same place where he enslaved over 600 people. That momentum led straight into some early conflicts and a massive rising sense of national pride. James Madison, known as the father of the Constitution, faced an absolute disaster during the War of 1812 when the British actually burned down the White House. But American forces held the line in Baltimore in 1814, which inspired the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner. This surge of pride ushered in what was called the Era of Good Feelings under James Monroe. The political drama cooled off, and Monroe famously dropped the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, strictly telling Europe that they needed to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. Moving right along to Unit 2, Expansion and Rising Tensions. Because if you thought that era of good feelings was going to last forever, well, you haven't been paying attention to politics. The drama absolutely exploded in the 1824 election. Andrew Jackson won the popular vote, but the House of Representatives picked John Quincy Adams in what Jackson furiously called a corrupt bargain. So Jackson spent 4 years plotting his revenge, stormed back to win in 1828, and his supporters threw a White House inaugural party so wild, they literally smashed the china and destroyed the furniture. Jackson later handpicked his successor, Martin Van Buren, who unfortunately inherited an immediate economic disaster, the Panic of 1837, earning him the nickname Martin Van Ruin. That set the stage for William Henry Harrison, who holds a pretty tragic record of just 31 days in office. He gave a nearly 2-hour inaugural address in the freezing rain, without a coat, caught typhoid fever from contaminated White House water, and died just a month into his term. Now, what's truly staggering is James K. Polk's sheer efficiency. Just look at this massive to-do list. Acquire Oregon, acquire California, lower tariffs, and establish an independent treasury. He came into office, accomplished every single item on that list in just one term, stretching America from coast to coast for the first time, and then he tragically dropped dead just 3 months after leaving office. But you see, all that massive expansion brought massive problems. The big question was, would these new territories allow slavery? Zachary Taylor and Millard Fillmore merely kicked the can down the road. Then came Franklin Pierce, who signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, basically letting territories vote on the issue. It sounded democratic in theory, but it led directly to Bleeding Kansas, which was essentially a violent, bloody mini-civil war. Following him, James Buchanan watched 7 southern states openly threaten secession, and he essentially did nothing to stop it. Class, this brings us to Unit 3, Civil War and Reconstruction. This is the gravest, darkest period in American history, where the nation violently fractured. Over 600,000. Take a moment to really look at that number. That is the devastating death toll of the American Civil War, the bloodiest conflict in U.S. history. Abraham Lincoln was tasked with somehow holding the Union together through this unimaginable crisis. During that time, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, delivered the Gettysburg Address, and paved the way for the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery forever, before he was tragically assassinated just 5 days after the war ended. Lincoln's monumental legacy presents one of the starkest contrasts in our history when you compare it to his immediate successor, Vice President Andrew Johnson. Johnson was basically Lincoln's polar opposite. He aggressively fought Reconstruction, which led Congress to impeach him. He was actually the very first president to be impeached, though he managed to escape removal from office by a single vote. To correct course, former Union General Ulysses S. Grant stepped in. Grant actively protected former slaves, crushed the KKK, and helped pass the 15th Amendment guaranteeing black men the right to vote. But Grant's administration was plagued by financial scandals, which kicked off an era of intense political chaos and really high turnover. The spoils system, giving plush government jobs to your political buddies, was completely out of control. It got so bad that James Garfield was actually assassinated by a man who was just angry he didn't get a government job. This tragedy finally forced Garfield's successor, Chester A. Arthur, to pass vital civil service reforms to try and end the corruption. Following him, Grover Cleveland became basically a walking veto stamp against shady bills and famously ended up serving 2 non-consecutive terms. Turning the page to the 20th century, we have Unit 4 becoming a global superpower. America was about to step onto the world stage in a massive way, starting with William McKinley, who turned the U.S. into an imperial power after the Spanish-American War, right before becoming the 3rd president to be assassinated. And McKinley's successor was a man who was just truly built different. Teddy Roosevelt famously declared, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose." He literally said this after being shot in the chest during a campaign stop. And then he actually proceeded to deliver a 90-minute speech with the bullet still lodged inside him. No way, right? As president, Teddy was a relentless force for change. He busted corporate trusts, created the national parks, and built the Panama Canal. The early 20th century brought massive, violent shifts. The boom of the Roaring Twenties crashed violently into the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover's hands-off approach failed miserably, leaving millions destitute in shanty towns they called Hoovervilles. Enter Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the only president to serve 4 terms. He stepped up by launching the massive New Deal, introducing Social Security and sweeping banking reforms. Then, after the absolute tragedy of Pearl Harbor, FDR led the nation into World War II. Sadly, FDR passed away before the war's end, leaving Vice President Harry Truman in charge. Now, Truman had been kept completely in the dark about the atomic bomb project, but once he was briefed, he made the fateful, history-altering decision to drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered, and World War II officially came to a close. And that leads us right into our final chapter, Unit 5, the Modern Presidency. Americans crave stability after decades of crisis, so they elected World War II hero Dwight D. Eisenhower, who built the interstate highway system and ended the Korean War. He was followed by the young, glamorous John F. Kennedy, who launched the space race and navigated the tense Cuban Missile Crisis before his tragic assassination in 1963. The presidency of Lyndon B. Johnson was defined by extreme duality. On one hand, LBJ oversaw an incredible domestic transformation, pushing through the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and Medicare. On the other hand, his presidency was completely overshadowed by a foreign disaster, the massive escalation of the Vietnam War, which resulted in intense protests and devastating casualties. His successor, Richard Nixon, started strong by opening relations with China and creating the EPA. But it all came crashing down with the Watergate scandal. Nixon tried to cover up a break-in at the Democratic National Committee, and when the secret tape surfaced, he became the first and only U.S. president to ever resign. Fast-forwarding a bit through the late 20th century, we see 3 very distinct eras. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan shifted the conservative movement, cut taxes, and pushed the Soviet Union until the Cold War ended. The 1990s saw Bill Clinton oversee a massive economic and tech boom, though he became the second president to be impeached due to the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Then, in the 2000s, George W. Bush's presidency was forever defined by the tragedy of 9/11. He launched wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, eventually leaving office with historically low approval ratings. Moving right into the 21st century, it's been a complete roller coaster of historic milestones and huge crises. Barack Obama made history as the first black president, passed Obamacare, and dealt with the fallout of the 2008 financial meltdown. Donald Trump entered as the first president with zero prior political or military experience, passing tax cuts and appointing Supreme Court justices before COVID-19 completely upended the world. This led to Joe Biden, who oversaw the nationwide vaccine rollout, but faced a chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and skyrocketing inflation. Now, this actually brings up a very rare historical parallel. Donald Trump's recent return to office makes him only the second president in American history, alongside Grover Cleveland, to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. So it turns out history really does echo itself, doesn't it? So class, after reviewing 45 unique leaders, from brilliant minds and reluctant generals, all the way to catastrophic failures and massive scandals, I want to ask you this. What is next for the presidency? How does an office that has navigated civil war, economic depression, and global pandemics continue to adapt to the future? Well, if the past is any indication, some habits die hard. Presidents absolutely love snagging land. We waged war with Mexico for territory, we bought Alaska, and currently Donald Trump has even expressed interest in acquiring Greenland from Denmark. I know it sounds crazy, but is it really that far outside the box for an office that once bought half a continent for just 4 cents an acre? Something to think about as you pack up your notes. That's our explainer for today, class dismissed. Keep questioning the history, and I'll see you all next time.